From Drop Biscuit Studios and the people who brought you Wondery's Inside Jaws, Inside The Exorcist, and Inside Psycho comes You Talking to Me? Bite-sized Hollywood history with plenty of bite. The Kidnapping of Jimi Hendrix. This is You Talking to Me? I'm Mark Ramsey. Everybody knows that Jimi Hendrix is one of the iconic figures of 20th century rock and roll. But did you know about the time Hendrix was kidnapped? That's okay, Hendrix didn't remember it either. Let's back up. What made Jimi Hendrix such a musical supernova? His avant-garde fusion of blues and rock and rhythm transformed not only the music scene, but it changed the face of popular music itself. Rock legend Eric Clapton saw Hendrix perform on stage for the first time in 1969. He just played about every style you could think of, Clapton recalled, and not in a flashy way. But when he walked off, my life was never the same again. By that year, Hendrix was the world's highest paid rock musician. It was the year of Woodstock, and Hendrix was the headliner. He electrified the crowd with his set and his explosive rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. Hendrix was almost as famous for his notorious drug habit, a habit which would contribute to his untimely death in 1970 at only 27. Jimi Hendrix did not start out on top, quite the contrary. In 1961, he joined the military. He lasted a year. He was thrown out after his commanding officer allegedly caught him stationed in the toilet, smoking a joint and masturbating. He had loved the guitar since he was 15, so he started playing gigs to make ends meet. One gig led to another, and soon he was playing with the Isley Brothers and Little Richard. He eventually moved to London to form the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and that's when a long stretch of hit-making began. Now Jimi's career was reaching dizzying heights, and so was his drug habit. Heroin was his narcotic of choice, and his addiction was crippling. One of his acquaintances at the time was a guy named John Roberts, who would later become famous when he was convicted of cocaine trafficking and masterminding the rise of the Medellin cartel in the 1980s. But back then, Roberts owned the Manhattan nightclub Salvation, and he was a gangster, a made man. Jimi was a bad junkie, Roberts said. Jimi really liked blues guitarist Leslie West, and one night the two of them played our living room all night long. Jimi had to shoot speed in his arm to keep up with Leslie. Hendrix had people who would occasionally buy dope for him, said Roberts. But sometimes he'd get so sick he'd come into Salvation looking for drugs on his own. One night, two Italian kids at the club, not mafia, but wise guy wannabes, they saw Jimi in there looking for dope and they decided, hey, that's Jimi Hendrix. Let's grab him and see what we can get. Well, as wise guys go, these were not the wisest. These guys were morons, Roberts said. They promised Jimi some dope and took him to a house out of the city. I don't know if they wanted money or a piece of his record contract, but they called Jimi's manager demanding something. Next thing I knew, the club manager called me and said Jimi had been taken from our club by some Italians. It took me 2 or 3 phone calls to get the names of the kids who were holding Jimi. We reached out to these kids and made it clear, you let Jimi go or you are dead. Do not harm a hair of his afro. Well, they let Jimi go, afro unharmed. The whole escapade lasted maybe 2 days. So what did Jimi Hendrix think about all this? Think about what? Jimi was so stoned he probably didn't even know he was ever kidnapped, Roberts said. We waited a week or so and went after these kids. We gave them a beating they would never forget. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening right now. Give us a 5-star rating and please tell your friends. You talking to me? I'm Mark Ramsey.